The Welsh village of Aberfan falls silent 50 years after the disaster that killed 144 people, most of them children. Remembering the dead at the exact moment when the village was suddenly hit by an avalanche of coal mining waste. It swept down the hillside, engulfing a primary school and houses surrounding it. Some rescuers had to dig with their bare hands to reach survivors.
Hell of a noise, didn't know what it was. And we looked up to the window and you could see a black mass.
Prince Charles laid a wreath in the village this afternoon and paid tribute to the survivors, saying no one could have borne those losses with greater strength or greater courage. Also tonight, a teenager is arrested on suspicion of terrorism after a suspect package was found on the tube in London yesterday. Sailing past the white cliffs of Dover, the Russian warships heading to Syria.
It's been an extraordinary display of Russian military power just a few miles off the British coast. One Moscow newspaper called it an armada.
The undercover fake sheikh, journalist Mazar Mahmoud, is jailed for tampering with evidence in a drugs trial. And a controversial twist for Wonder Woman as the fictional characters made a United Nations envoy for women.
In the south, trees chopped down to make millions of these, which end up in the bin. So could this be the answer to the war on waste? And looking for a new home, an animal sanctuary is forced to make way for 80 new houses.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 10. It was one of the worst disasters in modern British history. This morning at 9:15, a minute's silence was held in the village of Aberfan. It was the exact moment, 50 years ago, when 116 children between the ages of 7 and 10 were killed, along with 28 adults. They died when an avalanche of coal waste, 150,000 tonnes of it, slid down the hillside and engulfed the village primary school and houses surrounding it. Around half the children at the school died. Sian Lloyd has spent the day in Aberfan.
Early morning in Aberfan, and a community coming together to remember the disaster 50 years ago. The site of Pantglas School is now a memorial garden. At 9:15, the moment classrooms were engulfed, silence fell. And at the cemetery, high on the hillside. Church bells broke the silence. This was a time to remember the 144 people who died in a man-made disaster when liquefied coal waste slid down the mountainside. 8-year-old Gerald Kerwin was in the second-year juniors. He was one of the lucky ones, but his memories are still very raw.
Could you hear a rumbling, like a thunder, like a jet aeroplane? Hell of a noise, didn't know what it was. And we looked up to the window and you could see a black mass come into the window. I'd been pushed across the classroom against the back wall. The muck was up to my chest. We were just waiting, wondering what had happened to cause the devastation that we were trapped in.
Where classrooms had once stood, today the Prince of Wales planted a tree, a tribute to the lost generation.
No one should have to bear the losses you suffered, but no one could have borne those losses with greater strength or greater courage.
A balloon for each of the victims, and a moment for Gerald Kerwin to share with his granddaughter. after keeping his emotions bottled up for half a century.
We never ever spoke about it to my mother and father, my brothers, nobody. Even the children, there was only a few of us in that second year who survived. It was like our little dirty secret.
But it had been a disaster that was waiting to happen. Coal waste had been dumped in huge tips on top of streams and natural springs on Merthyr Mountain. Local people were joined by miners in the search for survivors. But as the hours passed, rescuers realised that the children they were now finding had all died. Many were looking for their own sons and daughters. David Goldsworthy lost his 10-year-old brother Richard that day. This is the first time he's returned to Aberfan on the anniversary itself from Canada, where he emigrated more than 40 years ago.
Daredevil, loved dinosaurs, would have been 60 this year in August. And the fact that I'd like to have had a brother.
No one was ever prosecuted for the lives that were lost, although the National Coal Board was found to be to blame.
I can go back to that class in seconds. If I close my eyes, I'm there. And I don't imagine that will ever go away.
Today has been difficult for many people here in Aberfan. For some, it's been the first time that they've opened up and spoken publicly about what happened that day. This community showed great strength when fighting for answers and justice following the disaster, and it continues to show that resilience, particularly today, 50 years on, when so many people have been looking in on Aberfan. The community spirit here has been tremendous.
Sian Lloyd, thank you. A 19-year-old man has been arrested under the Terrorism Act following the discovery of a suspicious device on a tube train in London yesterday morning. The man was arrested today by armed police who used a taser stun gun during the operation on a street in North London. Our Home Affairs correspondent June Kelly has the story.
The teenage suspect under arrest and being led away by counter-terrorism officers. It was early afternoon when they moved in on him on a busy road in Holloway in North London. Armed officers were involved in a large police operation.
They had him just where the underbridge is, just there, 200.
It was all witnessed by this man who doesn't want his face shown.
All of a sudden I see 4 or 5 men running towards this guy, and then they put him on the floor. Say they were shouting, saying, I'm police, I'm police. And then I was looking from upstairs, they had him on the floor, and he was struggling, obviously. But I didn't know what was going on.
Officers used a taser stun gun to overpower the 19-year-old.
The taser gun was on the floor. He was struggling not to get arrested, but in the end, they arrested him and they took him away.
He's been detained after a security alert yesterday on the London Tube network. A suspicious package was found on a train at North Greenwich Station and was detonated in a controlled explosion. Police are said to be keeping an open mind about a possible motive and are not looking for anyone else at this stage. Over the past 24 hours, patrols have been stepped up around transport hubs in the capital to reassure the public. The device is now being forensically examined. There are reports, unconfirmed by the police, that it contained wires and possibly a clock. Tonight, the suspect is being held on suspicion of committing, preparing and instigating terrorist acts. June Kelly, BBC News, Holloway in North London.
Theresa May has warned other European leaders that Britain mustn't be sidelined within the EU while both sides negotiate Brexit. The Prime Minister was speaking after a summit in Brussels, where she was allowed just 5 minutes in the early hours of this morning to outline her position on leaving the European Union. From Brussels, here's our political editor, Laura Kunsberg.
Never underprepared. Colour-coded documents tagged ready for the talks. But after only a 5-minute hearing at 1 a.m, can Theresa May make others listen? Not just throw up their hands, or worse, gang up against Britain. She pleaded for a fair hearing.
My aim is to cement Britain as a close partner of the EU once we have left. And the UK will continue to face similar challenges to our European neighbours. We will continue to share the same values. And so I want a mature, cooperative relationship with our European partners.
Do you really expect all 27 countries in the European Union to keep listening to Britain when we are quitting? Aren't they entitled, actually, to ignore us now?
That as long as we're members of the European Union, we will continue to meet our rights and obligations as members of the European Union. And that has been welcomed, and I think that is the right spirit and approach to take with this. We will continue to play our role, as I have done, sitting around the table today. I can assure you that I haven't been backwards in coming forwards on issues.
But don't kid yourself. Just listen to the EU's top official.
How did the evening go with Theresa May?
We're not the priority.
We had no special event with Theresa May yesterday.
There's a fight to be heard, to stop influence draining away before we leave.
She has all experience. She knows the corridor. She knows how to talk, how to behave, and what to expect from others. So she's prepared.
There's still business to do on steel dumping, on Russia. Allies who might need persuading.
How did you get on with Theresa May last night?
Wonderful. That the UK still deserves to have a voice.
This is so tricky for the Prime Minister because Britain's basically told the rest of the EU we want a divorce, but we won't move out for 2 years and we still want to call the shots. Theresa May is keen to preserve as much influence as possible, but that will be irritating to the rest of the EU.
It's been a grumpy summit all round, with tensions between its leaders on Brexit. And despite the Brussels top brass's best efforts, an EU trade deal with Canada is being blocked by just one part of Belgium, Wallonia. A taste of what might lie ahead for us. As meeting the EU's top official, the difficulties of escaping the EU's embrace begin to sink in. As leaders left after 15 hours of talks out of 24,
more or less 1 hour and a half to Italian journalists.
Not much is settled but this. There's no guarantee continental colleagues will heed Britain's demand to be heard. No sense even that our wishes will be a priority. And the Prime Minister leaves under no illusion that quitting the EU will be smooth. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Brussels.
Well, while in Brussels, Theresa May said the European Union had to keep all options open to try to halt Russia's bombing of civilians in the Syrian city of Aleppo. Her warning came as a Russian task force, including an aircraft carrier, steamed through the English Channel on its way to Syria. The convoy was shadowed all the way by Royal Navy ships, as our correspondent Daniel Sanford reports.
Just offshore from Dover Harbour, beneath the iconic White Cliffs of Dover, cruising into the English Channel, Russia's only aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, a 30-year-old survivor from the Soviet era sailing its first combat mission. On its decks, MiG-29s, two of the planes on board that will reinforce the Russian power play in Syria. Also in the flotilla, the battle cruiser Peter the Great. And the Russian ships were man-marked, as the Defence Secretary put it, by the Royal Navy. The Type 45 destroyer HMS Duncan had sailed from Portsmouth to do the defensive duties. As we watched, all the ships were sailing west, straight down the main shipping lane.
It's been an extraordinary display of Russian military power just a few miles off the British coast. One Moscow newspaper called it an armada, and its chosen route, straight down the English Channel, is likely to have been chosen deliberately.
The warships could have gone round the north coast of Scotland, but this was the route that sent a powerful message, one which a former Royal Navy admiral said was a wake-up call.
Since the end of the Cold War, we've allowed our capabilities to decline, and I also think our skills have declined as well. We need to get back into the game of actually countering the Russians whenever they seek to coerce either European nations or project power like they have done with this task group.
The task group will be reinforcing what's already a big Russian presence in Syria. Today, the EU, blocked by Italy, stopped short of threatening sanctions against Russia for what it called atrocities like the bombing of civilians in Aleppo, while Moscow's ambassador to Brussels denied that this was all a massive demonstration of hard power.
We're not talking about Russia's place on the world stage. That's not the aim of what Russia is doing in Syria. What Russia is doing is assisting at the request of the legitimate government of that country, assisting its fight against terrorism.
The truce in Aleppo, announced by Moscow, still held today. There were no UN medical evacuations, however, and no civilians were able to leave, both sides blaming each other for blocking the routes out of the city. But the show of strength off the south coast was a reminder that the truce won't hold forever, and more Russian firepower is on its way. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, in the English Channel.
In Iraq, government troops backed by Kurdish forces are inching forward in their fight against so-called Islamic State. Clashes near the city of Mosul have continued throughout the day, with Iraqi troops pushing in from the south and Kurdish fighters from the east. Today, IS struck back, launching an attack in Kirkuk, 100 miles away. Our Middle East correspondent Orla Guerin is less than 10 miles from Mosul and sent this report from the front line.
Savouring freedom. Civilians brought to safety by Kurdish fighters. Victory, they say. They escaped the tyranny of so-called Islamic State and the dangers of coalition airstrikes. IS targets north of Mosul being pounded again today, but they hit back hard. This was the scene in the city of Kirkuk. Security forces battling to regain control after a daring and deadly attack by IS. They hit multiple targets in and around the oil-rich city, which is 100 miles from Mosul and had been considered secure. Troops hunting for the militants who proved they can still strike and far from their stronghold. Back at the front line, bomb disposal experts arrive to check for silent killers. They've already cleared 300 landmines along a stretch of 3 miles.
Well, troops are getting into position now for mine clearance. This is absolutely crucial for the Peshmerga to be able to proceed. The mines are slowing progress and they're claiming lives, but the work has to be done with care. Islamic State has laid mines in this area like a carpet.
Then a lone vehicle sped towards us. There were fears it was a suicide bomber. Fortunately, a false alarm. Nearby, civilians who had just fled, now safe from IS, but being screened by Kurdish intelligence. They're trying to prevent militants escaping among the displaced. Faris tells us they were forced to grow beards, and if IS caught someone with a phone, they were beheaded.
How did you manage to get away? How did you...
He's rushed away before he can say more. A new camp is now being raised here for the many others who are expected to seek refuge from Iraq's latest war. Orla Guerin, BBC News, north of Mosul.
In other news, London City Airport was closed for around 3 hours this afternoon after it was evacuated because of a suspected chemical leak. 26 people were treated at the scene for breathing difficulties. 2 were taken to hospital. Tonight, police said they discovered what they believe to be a CS gas spray, but they say it's not being treated as terrorist-related and that the spray canister may have been discarded by a passenger. The French authorities say they will start clearing the migrant camp in Calais, known as the Jungle, on Monday. It's home to around 5,000 people, most of them hoping to reach the UK. Migrants will be put on buses and taken to 300 temporary accommodation centres around France. The authorities say the whole camp will be demolished by Friday. The FBI is investigating major cyber attacks which have been affecting some of the best-known names on the internet today, including Twitter Amazon and Spotify. The sites were disrupted after what's known as denial of service attacks. It's not clear yet who is responsible, but the White House said US authorities are looking at whether it is a criminal act. Nissan says it will decide next month whether it will produce a new version of its Qashqai model at its plant in Sunderland, in the first major investment decision in the car industry since the Brexit vote. Last month, the company's chief executive warned he could halt investment because Brexit could make it more difficult to export cars to Europe. The Conservatives won the by-election in Witney, brought about by David Cameron's departure from politics, but the new MP's majority was cut from 25,000 to around 5,000 due to a strong performance by the Liberal Democrats, who came second. In last night's other by-election, Labour held the uncontested seat of Batley and Spen following the killing of the MP Joe Cox in June. Mazen Mahmoud, the man better known as the fake sheikh who was responsible for a string of high-profile tabloid stings, is beginning a 15-month jail sentence tonight. He was convicted of tampering with evidence in the drugs trial of the singer Tulisa Kontostavlos, which collapsed. Mahmoud has now been sacked by his employer, News UK, owned by Rupert Murdoch. Our correspondent David Silito was in court.
The man with his face hidden behind the hood is Mazen Mahmoud, the fake sheikh, the king of the tabloid sting. He would pose as an Arab sheikh and he lured dozens of people to do or say things that made them front-page news. Many ended up in prison. Today, he was the one heading for jail. A 15-month sentence for lying, manipulating evidence, trying to get the singer Tulisa convicted on a drugs charge. Outside court, one of his former victims, the actor John Alford, read out a statement.
We now know that Mazen Mahmoud is a manipulator of evidence and a serial perjurer. This goes to show no one is above the law.
Behind him, others who'd been stung by the fake sheikh.
He's a con man. He's a nasty con man. He's not a journalist. He's a nasty con man.
Did you ever expect this day?
No, I never did. I always thought that we, the little people, would never get the truth out there, and it's a great day for us.
Now, many of the criminal cases are under review.
There have been many convictions. Over the years, he's boasted about how many people he's helped send to prison, sometimes based almost entirely on evidence from Mazen Mahmoud.
He has now been sacked by The Sun on Sunday, but some wonder why it didn't happen sooner. It was 28 years ago that he left his job at the Sunday Times after being accused of lying. He was soon back a star of Rupert Murdoch's News of the World. His former boss always felt there was something wrong.
The warnings were there. The warnings were there for the police, who continued to assist him. The warnings were there for News International, who continued to employ him. And I found it astonishing that he wasn't found out sooner.
And of course, all this follows the hacking scandal. The government said there will be a second part to the Leveson inquiry, an investigation into the press and the police. This conviction has only added to the demands for that inquiry to finally take place. David Silito, BBC News.
Now, to comic book fans, she's an iconic superhero brought to life in a hit 70s TV show and soon a film. To the United Nations, she represents female empowerment. And because of that, the UN has made the fictional character Wonder Woman an honorary UN ambassador for women and children. Unsurprisingly, not everyone agrees, as our New York correspondent Nick Bryant reports.
She can leap from tall buildings. She can also bend steel. But the transformation of Wonder Woman into a UN ambassador for female empowerment has plunged this world body into the kind of storm that would test even her superhuman powers. With the new Wonder Woman film scheduled for release next year, UN officials saw the chance to reach younger audiences around the world. And at the rollout of their fictional ambassador today, Linda Carter, the actress who played it in the 70s, spoke of the superhero's inspirational qualities for girls.
So Wonder Woman lives, do not doubt it. She lives in every woman. Wonder Woman helps bring out the inner strength every woman has.
But staff at the UN today mounted a silent protest. Real women deserve a real ambassador, read their signs. There's also real annoyance that cultural, religious, geopolitical sensibilities might be trampled by this cartoonish character's leather boots.
Hundreds of UN staff have added their names to an online petition complaining, and I quote, that a large-breasted white woman of impossible proportions, scantily clad in a shimmery, thigh-bearing bodysuit with an American motif and knee-high boots is not an appropriate figurehead.
So what's been the reaction outside the UN?
I like what she stands for. I don't really appreciate what she's wearing.
Although Wonder Woman is a great character, I think that we can find someone better to represent women, someone who's not so hypersexualized.
The UN hoped this collaboration would be a PR coup, but there are many senior figures here who view it as a towering PR disaster. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
That's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Good night.